I'm often asked what mob history discussions took place with other members during my time in the life. And believe it or not, although there were certain conversations, there were not as much as people would imagine. One of the topics that came up a few times by a few people over the years was regarding the sons of Jimmy Burke and Mark Reiter, who I recently made a video about. So taking that into account, I'll speak about Mark Reiter's son first. Shortly after Mark Reiter's 1988 conviction, his son Greg showed up to a meeting with Tommy Patera and his associates. The outcome of that meeting resulted in Greg Reiter being shot and killed. On May 18, 1987, Frankie Burke was standing outside on Liberty Avenue on the borderline of Brooklyn and Queens at 2:30 a.m. when he also was shot and killed. At the time of their sons' deaths, both Burke and Reiter was incarcerated. On January 22, 1982, Jimmy Burke was sentenced to 20 years for the college point shaving. And in 1985, he received an additional 20 years for a 1979 murder. Mark Reiter was convicted for narcotics and 3 murders in August of 1988 and sentenced on October 24, 1988 to 2 life terms plus 60 years. In addition to all that time, the judge had the nerve to sentence him to special parole, which absolutely made no sense. Both these murders, Frankie Burke's and Greg Reiter's, were avenged. On September 10, 1987, at 9:45 a.m., a 3-man hit team walked into father and son barbershop at 8301 101st Avenue in Ozone Park, Queens, and shot the owner, Vito Scaglione, to death as he sat in one of his barber chairs. Incidentally, Scaglione happened to be the brother-in-law of Colombo member Dominic Cataldo. Billy Bright was stabbed to death in Atlanta Penitentiary on May 24, 1994, and for good measure, Colombo member Tommy Osera was killed on November 13, 1989. One of the common opinions of guys in that life is that both Burke and Reiter should have kept their sons away from the street. Easier said than done. In prison, you have very limited control of what's taking place out on the street. Obviously, Jimmy Burke and Mark Reiter knew how to move in their environment and both survived during their time on the street. However, their sons, both involved in the drug game, couldn't navigate through the treachery. In conclusion, whether you're doing a small amount of time or spending the rest of your life in prison, I believe I could speak for most people by saying you would never want to see your son sitting in a cell. And the reality is, had Frankie Burke or Greg Reiter not lost their lives, the probability of them ending up in prison was highly likely. Naturally, I'm sure their families would have preferred that outcome as opposed to what took place. As for Jimmy Burke and Mark Reiter, I hope they're both resting in peace and reunited with their sons.